Hi, Terri Bailey. Great to see you.
Hi, Simon. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Thanks for joining us today on Talk HR UK, episode 17 of the second season, which makes me feel even older than I did before I started. But
Oh,
we
sure.
thanks for joining us. We were talking not long ago around what would be an interesting thing to collaborate on, and we sort of based this on some of your recent work. So, for those sort of watching and listening that don't know you, I should introduce you properly. So, Terri Bailey, we met 1,000 years ago when you were the HR director at Virgin Holidays for a really long period of time.
Mm,
Following that, I've seen you develop what they're now calling a more fractional career, I guess, in terms of interim CPO and HR director roles with a really wide range of organizations. You've set up your own HR consultancy, Oralite 23, and that work continues to run as you work with lots of diverse clients. And that led us to this place where you said you'd been doing a lot of work with creating high performing teams, especially at exec level, which is so
mm,
key. And I'll be honest, my conversations this year with HR leaders have mostly been around that subject,
mm.
around the creation of high performing teams and how we foster that culture and move forward now that we're in this post pandemic landscape and trying to drive towards better performance and collaboration and ways of working. So,
Yeah.
this is a fab topic. Thank you for joining me.
Mm. I'm very pleased to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you're sitting comfortably. I have a few questions for you. So we'll start off with, well, I suppose in your experience, the strategies you found most effective when fostering collaboration amongst C-suite executives who've got diverse leadership styles. What's worked?
Yeah, great question to start us off. So from my perspective, I would say that having obviously everybody focused on the same goals is the starting point. That's what really helps. They're going to have their own individual objectives, but having those team objectives. They're all driving towards obviously the same goals, the same aims. It drives more collaborative behaviour within that C-suite. And most companies do that. Most companies have that. But I've worked with individuals that are far more focused on their own goals and working in silos and really being collaborative. And obviously that can be challenging. So some of the work I've been doing is very much around getting everybody on the same page to be able to deliver the overall strategy without obviously them being too focused individually. Obviously, the best way to combat that is by having that clear understanding of what the business strategy is, what the goals are, also having some agreements sort of cross-functionally as well. What is each exec working on, what they're responsible for, but then working with all the other execs to understand, look, this is the help I'm going to need from you to be able to deliver, and obviously vice versa as well. And in my experience, ideally that's led by the CEO and the MD to say, right, how are we going to do this cross-functionally? But sometimes it might fall to the CPO, HRD to do that. So very much part of that strategy process, doing some sort of cross-functional agreements focused on delivering the business strategy, and so that each team member knows what they're doing, how they're going to support the other team members, and diverse leadership styles can really complement each other. You can have a real sort of yin and yang going on,
Yeah.
but we also know that sometimes they clash as well. Obviously, always a challenge.
Mm,
When I'm talking with exec teams, I will talk a lot about them being a high performing team and what that looks like, including when they're not in agreement.
right.
So a good amount of challenge, I would say, is essential to a high performing team. You want them to be supportive. So going back to that sort of support and challenge model, you want them being supportive, but you don't want them to be too harmonious because then you're not going to get the challenge that you really need.
Right.
Somebody needs to be able to challenge to say, is that the best way? Is that the right thing to do? So having those individuals being able to challenge in a really positive way is obviously key.
Mm,
So too much agreement's sort of not healthy. So you need a bit of challenge as well. And obviously the focus is all on what's good for the business. So,
right.
I don't advocate conflict just for the sake of it, and sometimes conflict is purely ego driven. You can usually tell which is which, but for
Yeah.
some people, the ego comes in. So we need to recognize that sort of, different people respond differently to different leadership styles as well. So having a really diverse exec team is fantastic. No one size fits all.
Mm,
So they each bring something special to the table. They've each got a sort of superpower. And it's learning and appreciating what that is and the part that they play in that high performing team. So I would say it's really important to have a very clear strategy, some cross-functional sort of working around how are we going to make sure we support each other, very focused on delivering the strategy and having a diverse exec team as well.
Excellent. So when you're at the beginning of this, you get to set your stall out, and they're all still behaving nicely at this point. And
Yeah.
nodding and going, yeah, we can work with this, you know.
Yeah, beginning. But to be quite honest, I do quite relish those challenging conversations because, you know, there's always an elephant in the room, you know, if we're
Yeah.
honest. There
Yeah,
always
of course.
is. And, you know, sometimes I will have that conversation to say, actually, if we don't talk about that, you're not going to move forward as a team because that will always be
Mm.
there. And people aren't being their authentic self because of, you know, whatever the reason it might be. That elephant in the room is there. So I really encourage some sort of openness and some
Yeah,
honesty to enable them to then be able to move forward properly.
that's great. Yeah, important. So, well, staying with that, so how do you identify and then address those potential conflicts, misalignments between different members of the board or C-suite so that we maintain a nice cohesive team dynamic as you move through the issues that you're going to be addressing?
Yeah, and it can be challenging. And I'm sure most CPOs, HRDs will tell you that navigating those dynamics of the C-suite can actually become quite tiresome and quite time consuming at times. You know, sometimes the elephant in the room is ego.
Yeah.
And, you know, quite often I'll hear we're a low ego team. And I think, great, you know, and then I start working with them and think, it's not quite the case.
Not what you said. Yeah.
But for some individuals, it's really important to win every argument or to have their point or to have their own way. And, you know, I usually have quite honest conversations with them and encourage them to really sort of choose their battles rather than trying to win everything. Think about the things that are really important to them. And then think about the things that they could potentially compromise on. And I usually suggest that they keep focused on the end goal. You know, what are you all trying to deliver as a team? If sort of egos are getting in the way, then, you know, we need to identify that
Mm.
because you need them to collaborate. So all the time there's arguments, there's conflicts going on. It really takes away the focus and the energy from what they're trying to or what they need to achieve as a team. So
Mm.
I would say creating a real feedback culture can help. So
Yeah.
having honest conversations with each other, it can stop issues escalating as well. So if you're kind of tackling those things right in the beginning, it can stop those sort of issues sort of festering long term. So having a feedback culture, being able to be really honest and open. And I think people are open to that as long as it's coming from a good place and
Mm.
people are being genuine. I always ask people when we talk about feedback, have you ever had some feedback that you don't connect with because you don't think it's coming from a good place? You know, you
Right.
think there's something malicious behind it, or you think there's something else going on. And I would say most people I ask that question to have said yes. You know,
Yeah.
so we've all experienced that. We've all experienced feedback that we do take on board and that we do sort of work on. And sometimes
Mm.
having really crunchy, difficult feedback is good. I remember getting really crunchy feedback a long time ago, and I was devastated at the time. I was thinking,
Yeah.
oh God, you know, it's awful. But having reflected, having thought about it, I thought, do you know what? The person's not coming from a bad place. And I know that they're not
Mm.
coming from a bad place. They're trying to help me. So I need to really look at this and see if I can do something with it, which I did.
Yeah.
So creating that feedback culture, especially among the execs, is really important because hopefully they will do the same with their teams as well. So
Mm.
then you've got that kind of knock-on effect. But I'd also encourage sort of C-suite members to really try and resolve conflict between themselves where they can, rather than escalating it to the CEO and the MD.
Right.
Because in all my conversations with CEOs over the years, a lot of frustrations they have is that each of the execs are coming to them, you know, maybe moaning about somebody else or
Yeah.
having challenges with somebody else. So quite often I've helped facilitate those conversations between the two individuals to get a resolution. So, you know, discord is bound to happen between individuals. We know that, you know, it happens at every level. But you really need to sort of focus on getting it resolved and
Mm.
then being willing to resolve it and compromising at times, as we said. And I've got a quote that I use when I sort of talk about conflict or when I'm teaching how to sort of handle and deal with conflict.
Right.
It's from William James, who's an American philosopher and psychologist. And he said, whenever you are in conflict with someone, there is one factor that can make the difference between damaging the relationship. That factor is attitude. And
Mm.
I love that. And I usually tell
Yeah.
people sort of up front, I usually share that up front if we're doing some conflict resolution, because I think it then gets them thinking and into the right mindset. So rather than kind of going in with sort of being all defensive or attacking and wanting to win, it gets them to think about their behaviours as well. And I think sort of bringing it back to, look, we can resolve this. We need to be grown-ups. We're all adults working in an adult environment. So, we need to deal with this properly. We need to resolve that conflict, and then be able to move on. It's also worth remembering that negative behaviours are often driven by fear. So I always keep that in mind when I'm dealing with conflict, maybe
Right.
taking a compassionate approach, and being more understanding of what might be driving those behaviours can often help. It kind of, for me, it sort of gets me being more neutral and thinking about
Mm.
what's driving this. Also saying that I've never been afraid to be firm and direct. If I think somebody is being unreasonable, I'll be quite happy to say that, and come on, we need to get a good resolution here. I think some NLP techniques are usually always good with that sort of, second positioning and fly on the wall and getting people to think slightly differently. I'll use all different tools and techniques to get to a resolution. But I think what's really important within that leadership team is, obviously they need to focus on the goal. The importance of the relationships with each other, obviously, absolutely key. They need to be collaborating. They need to be sort of accommodating at times. They need to compromise at times. And if they're competing, they shouldn't really be competing with each other. They
No.
should be competing with sort of, their external competitors, or, driving the agenda forward for the business. So, yeah, it happens. We know that conflict happens, but we just need to take I guess, sensible and a proactive approach to dealing with it.
Definitely, and as you say, it often will lead to a positive outcomes, learnings, development, the feedback. It's interesting, that quote as well. I remember my first kind of mentor when I was working back in L&D 1,000 years ago, and it was always, breakfast is the feedback of champions, and I'll always remember thinking, oh, that kind of landed, with my tiny brain at the time. I was like, yeah, that works quite well. And it's always, as you say, if it's coming from a good place, there's always something in there you can do. But no, interesting. It sounds like you wear a lot of hats when you're doing this. There's obviously there's mediation. There probably is that instructional piece, but therapist as well to a degree.
Yeah, and I think it's also you get better results when you're brave.
Yeah.
So I guess, earlier on in my career, I was probably a little bit more agreeable, more cooperative, maybe wouldn't challenge as much. But as you get more experienced and, as you sort of grow as an individual, now I've got no problem sort of, challenging or really putting something out there that will make them think. Because, leaving them in their comfort zones and pretending everything's all cozy, they're not going to grow as a team. They're not going to be that high performing team. So sometimes you have to go through a really uncomfortable situation or period where you're really pushing them, to be honest and to think about the impact, to have that breakthrough to move things forward. And that's sort of come with experience, and feedback, over the years, feedback
course.
As well.
Yeah, Sally. Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I suppose to dive into this a little further, are there any specific initiatives or practices, methods that you think have contributed to developing high performing teams under your stewardship? So work that you've done that where you've seen that success. What was it that moved them forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, as an initial step, I would always speak to the CEO and the MD about the team members and the business strategy. So that would always be my first step, understanding what the business strategy is, what the CEO is trying to achieve, understanding the team members that they have already. And Jim Collins in Good to Great suggests that, you choose your key people first, then decide where you're going. So that concept of first who, then what. And it's sort of, those that build great organizations make sure they have the right people on the bus and the right people in the key seats before they figure out where to drive the bus. So they always think about, who and then what they're going to do. And when they're facing sort of chaos and uncertainty, the concept is that you can't possibly predict what's coming around the corner. Your best strategy is to have a busload of people who can adapt and who can perform brilliantly no matter what comes next. So, the great vision without great people is irrelevant. So that's the concept. And I'll be really honest, I struggled with this in the beginning, because in my practical mind, I was very much like, well, surely we would work out the strategy first, then identify the people who have the right skills and experience to deliver the strategy. But, thinking about it and understanding it a little bit more, it's about identifying those great leaders who have the ability to adapt, who are high performers, who have the confidence to deal with that constant change, and bring people with them. And therefore, it can be sort of the next level down that potentially has the more technical expertise that I was initially focusing on. And then they'll be led by those great leaders. So it took me a little while to get my head around that, but I kind of, I do understand that. So making sure you've got the right people in the right roles doing the right things. My next step is usually psychometrics. So I've been a keen user of psychometrics for many, many years. I've always used them to help individuals understand themselves better, but also the team dynamic element as well. So utilising that information to help the team, understand what motivates them, what drives them, the things they like, they may not like, identifying their sort of superpowers as an individual, but also the superpower of the team as well. And, giving them information that they can understand and work with. So how is each person motivated? How do they like to communicate? How do they make their decisions? What's the best way to engage and work with them? It makes things so much easier when you've got some insights like that. So I absolutely promote, using those psychometrics to help build the relationship between the team members, as well as being focused on delivering the business results. So that would be my next step around the psychometrics. I then do a session called Ways of Working, and it's what it says. So it's about understanding the expectations and the commitments. So what does the CEO expect from their team? Yeah, what are the expectations? What are the commitments that he wants, or he, they, them, she? What do they want them to have? And this is usually a facilitated discussion, and then it goes the other way. So what are the expectations from the team members to the CEO? And we usually come out with, a document as such that says, right, okay, this is sort of, this is our contracting between ourselves around how we become a high performing team, the ways that we're going to work together for the greater good of the business, the ways we're going to work with other team members, our commitments that we're going to deliver, whatever that might be. And I've done this with lots of different organisations in different industries. Obviously, each one comes out with something slightly different, but it really helps focus that exec team on, in times of change, in times of challenge, in times of conflict, coming back to, well, look, this is what we agreed. If there was conflict, this was part of our ways of working. This is what we agreed that we would do. It is a really, really useful session, and I usually take it down to the next level, the level below as well, because it's great for those individuals. So the ways of working would be a key part of that, building that high performing team, their commitments to each other, their commitment to deliver. And you can hold people to account. The CEO can hold the team to account. The team members can hold the CEO to account to say, look, you haven't committed, you haven't done the things that you said that you committed to do. So we need to kind of go back to those ways of working. So that would be a facilitated session with an output that everybody agrees with. So again, getting everybody focused, everybody on the same page to deliver the strategy in the best way. Other activities that I would do is definitely some kind of regular review of the strategy and the progress against it. So this really keeps everybody focused. We know what gets measured, gets managed. So that most organisations have this in place anyway, but it's just a reminder that, right, let's check in. How are we doing against the strategy? We need to check we're on track. And also having a mechanism in place. So, if there are issues, if there are potential problems, the sooner they get raised, the better, they can be dealt with. And it also enables them to sort of manage risks. So, part of that sort of, business strategy is obviously taking responsibility for risks, and individual execs should be taking responsibility for the risks in their area and mitigating those risks where possible as well. And I know it's probably overstated, but communication is so important at this level.
Yeah.
Ensuring everyone's communicating with each other, but also their teams, keeping them up to date, focused on delivering the strategy. One organisation I worked with was very, very focused on the strategy. It was like, we just focus on the strategy. We're not going outside of it.
Right.
And they would only go outside of it if there was a really good reason to. But everybody just remained focused. It reminds me a little bit of, I think it's Ben Hunt Davis, who's the Olympian, the rower, and the kind of, will it make the boat go faster? And I love that concept. They absolutely did nothing unless, it was to make the boat go faster.
Had an output that led you towards the goal. Yeah.
Absolutely, to the point where they didn't go to the opening of the Sydney Olympics in 2000 because they asked the question, will it make the boat go faster? And they all said no, so they watched it on TV. And I love that. I love that kind of, real focus. So, making sure that everybody's focused on the strategy, absolutely key. Lots of communication. And then when it comes to, obviously, you want an engaged and motivated workforce. There's always been three things that I focused on, and I've been advocating sort of for this for many, many years around engagement. Line managers need to care about their people. Life is tough. People have so many challenges, so many responsibilities to juggle. Care about them, care about their lives outside work. Be compassionate, be understanding, give them flexibility, support them when they need it, encourage them to ask for help, and be really open to helping them get through those tough times. And what I found, adopting that is you've got so much loyalty back from those individuals, and you're not just doing it for that, you're doing it because you genuinely care about them. The relationships, their engagement, their willingness, to give back, is amazing. And then rewarding and recognizing them, having those mechanisms in place within the business, and it can be non-monetary, as we know, but give them some different rewards to choose from, or just saying thank you, just valuing someone's contribution, and it can't be underestimated, and quite often it's not done enough in business. So rewarding and recognizing. And then the final thing is personal development. So making sure that you're really taking care of your team's personal development, understand their aspirations, what are they looking to do, where are they looking to go, look for opportunities to develop them. And I see this very much as a two-way process. Two-way responsibility. So the companies provide opportunities, individuals need to proactively drive their personal development. And there's so many opportunities to do that out there in so many different ways. So there's no excuses, really. So I would say to really drive engagement and morale, care about your people, reward and recognise, and develop them personally. And even if you just concentrated on those three things, you would really move the dial. I know there's lots of other things you can do as well, but believe me, you would really move the dial just focusing on those things. And I think sort of leaders, line managers, they all need to understand that. About how do you drive engagement? How do you kind of make sure that your team's sort of morale is high, that they can cope, in times of change and difficulty, that they're resilient, they know you've got their back, you're looking after them. And I think that's really, really important.
Oh, definitely. As you say, they need to be able to read and understand where people are at any given time and react to that. And that actually leads nicely onto my next area. And also, without being too political and dating this podcast, but there are some really interesting examples of very successful leaders out there in the world at the moment who perhaps have some softer skills to develop, let's say, and there's always this perception, I always think, particularly in very technical businesses, that the people at the top are obviously brilliant at what they do, but is the emotional intelligence there? Are they, how do they work in a team? Are they siloed? And there are many great examples of leaders who have some challenging behaviors, let's say that. That's a good way of putting it. So staying with that. So the role that emotional intelligence, for example, would play in building a strong collaborative C-suite, and how you cultivate those behaviors among senior leaders.
Yeah, I think it is a great point. And I personally, I do feel that EQ plays an absolutely critical role in the effectiveness of the C-suite. Not only is it key for them to obviously better understand themselves in terms of sort of dealing with and controlling their feelings and emotions, but having an understanding of others will enable them to be more effective and have a more positive impact in their roles. We know, so much research being done, but we know managers and leaders who do have higher EQ have better morale, better engagement, better retention, within their teams. They're better equipped to deal with conflict and issues that arise. It also helps them to build relationships with others, to communicate better, and help them make sort of fair and reasonable decisions using that emotional intelligence. So I really do think there's enough research out there for the case of EQ to be put forward to get better results. And also, I do think it's something every CEO and MD should be concerned with. I know, as we've said, they're not all, but they really should be. I've come across many people with sort of low EQ, and their management style and leadership style is quite outdated, and quite frankly, if I'm honest, stunted. They don't get the best out of people because they're not taking the time to understand them or themselves really to be better managers and leaders. The ones who need it most are usually the hardest ones to convince they need to change their style.
Always.
And therein lies the irony of the problem. So if anyone is trying to convince the CEO MD of the merits of EQ, then, as we know, money talks. So, use some stats, use some research, help them understand how crucial this is to the success of the business. And in terms of cultivating it, I would absolutely include it as part of a leadership development or management development program. If there isn't one in place, I would be talking to the CEO about introducing it, and put it in place, as part of their team development. I do think it's really important. I'm probably similar to you. When you're scrolling through your social medias, you come across, people talking about bad bosses and some of the things they do. And I remember, just looking at some of them thinking, oh my goodness, that kind of mentality is so outdated. There's no way they're going to, keep or even attract good people. And I think the thing now is that, social media, and websites like Glassdoor, where, it's all on there.
Yeah.
People will talk about, what it's like to work at your organization, what the recruitment process was like, what the onboarding's like. They will talk about individuals, whether it's the CEO or the CPO or whoever, they will talk about individuals in those reviews, so it's quite transparent. And I remember doing some work recently, some strategy work, and I was talking about Glassdoor and how it can be very influential, and they didn't really kind of buy into it. They were like, oh, it's only a few people that go on Glassdoor, and and I've been keeping an eye on their Glassdoor results, and they're not good, and they're not getting any better. So actually, people do look at things like that. They do their research now. Many times I've looked at Glassdoor when I'm sort of, working with different companies, and I might have a look and think, actually, they've got a great score. They're doing some stuff really, really well. Or other times I think, gosh, people will look at this and not even bother applying, because they don't want to be part of that. So I think it's really important. I think, MD, CEO should absolutely make sure that emotional intelligence is part of their leadership development program and their management development program. And I think the sort of, the more antiquated way of doing things is going to become more and more sort of, it's not going to be popular. People are not going to work for companies that have really bad leaders. And they've been called out, so you can't hide anymore.
No, you're right. The debate's public, isn't it? It's there for all to see, and which is a healthy thing. I think, as you say, the people they're being found out to a degree. I think, and it is. It's certainly in my job. It's one of the first things we do when we take on a piece of work from an organisation. The first thing we'll do is check Glassdoor just to see that it lines up with what we've been told. And sometimes we bounce back and say we have had a look. And sometimes the trouble with it is it can be departmental as well, so it will point, as you say, to specific leaders and their ways of working. So there's nowhere to hide these days.
No, not anymore. That's the thing. I think it's a good thing. If you've got nothing to hide, then you shouldn't worry about things like that.
Exactly. So Well, so moving on, I mean, how do you ensure alignment between the C-suite members and the company's broader goals? Because obviously they're all, well, rightly or wrongly, I imagine there are times where they're all in lane. They're all staying in lane. You know, you've got the finance person, the people person, the tech person, the operations, the sales, the market. You know,
Yeah.
they're not, not sometimes I imagine it's hard to bring that together to company goals when they've all got their individual targets and areas, especially during current, times of change, transformation in the business. Yeah, how does that work?
I guess it comes back to having the right people on the bus. That would be the sort of starting point. And we can assume that they're there in the first place because they buy into the company's vision and plans. There must have been some alignment with the CEO for them to have joined the company. So ensuring that vision remains clear, that there's regular communication, I would say, and updates on how they're progressing against those goals, as we said before, that mechanism being in place. And all of the execs need to be committed to achieving those goals. So again, going back to the ways of working, just a sort of reference in there about having the commitments around implementing the strategy. If the execs are involved in the creation of the goals, obviously we know that helps to gain buy-in right from the beginning. And what is important is that an individual's department plans are not in misalignment with the overall company goals. And I have seen that in action, and it becomes a mess. So it's important that they're not distracted by the next new shiny thing, and that everyone kind of remains focused on the strategy, because that can happen, and suddenly you've got a department over here that's doing stuff that's not actually going to deliver the strategy. They've gone off at a tangent, and it's that then has a knock-on effect obviously on everybody. So checking cross-functionally when the strategy has been set initially, as we said in the beginning, that's really important. Make sure you've got some cross-functional teams to encourage that collaboration and relationship building. And it can also help with sort of influence and persuading others. So if you've got relationships and people trust each other, it's already established, that can help when you do need to maybe influence or persuade somebody else, because you've got some trust there, you've built up a relationship, as we said before, they might be coming from a good place. So that helps. Having a regular system in place around sort of progress against goals, we mentioned that before. Absolutely, opportunities to discuss those challenges when there are challenges, and what the potential solutions could be, and people being able to visually see the progress obviously is key to them kind of keeping on track.
So and sort of milestones and
yeah,
how
absolutely.
close we are to them at any given time kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big fan of the sort of RAG reports. It's so easy, and visually it's great. If you're on track or not. And from my perspective, even sort of as a line manager, I just think when you've got a RAG report, everything's on green. Great. You don't need to focus on that. It's either on track or within budget, managed by exception. If it's going well, just let things carry on. But I would probably be more focused on the ambers and the reds. They're the ones that you want to put your effort and energy into, because obviously there's some kind of delay or challenge for whatever reason. And I would make sure everybody's focus and energy were on those types of activities rather than the stuff that's kind of, plodding along really well. So regular feedbacks from the execs, to their teams, and vice versa. Their teams should be keeping the execs up to date on any challenges, on any issues that they might have. And also really robust change management practices in place. So lots of communication, lots of updates, lots of feedback, listening to the teams, understanding their issues, providing strong leadership for them. They're looking to the C-suite for really strong leadership. Give them confidence in your leadership abilities. So reinforcing the vision, the goals, the mission, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and also the values. We need the C-suite to really live the values, and making sure that they're leading by example. I've been in a few leadership meetings where I've had to remind the exec team of our values. Come on, we need to get back. This is not, and I'll quote one of the values. We need to get back on track and live our values. They need to be, we need to be seen to be the role models of these values. And we know that that's not always the case. So, again, having those strong and brave conversations to say, come on, let's get back. And I know it's probably easier said than done. if you have a very strong CEO that maybe won't take kindly to that. But, sometimes you do need to be brave and get everybody back on track. And I think if you are in that sort of CPO, HRD role, kind of really sort of reinforcing the values and making sure everybody's working together is not just their responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. But obviously we help to kind of implement and encourage it as well.
Definitely. It's as you say, it's HR or the people function now feel that it's maintained that uncomfortable companion role in these kind of forums, and as you say, dragging people back to a place they probably know they've drifted from. But you've got to formalize it and point it out and remind people what we're telling everyone else to do, and so that aligns as you say, the goals, the strategy to the behaviours, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So last question from me, I suppose, because you've been very generous with your time. Thank you, Terri. It's on a practical level this time, I suppose, the metrics or indicators that you use to assess the performance, the effectiveness of the board or the C-suite as a team. How do you know you're doing a good job and that they're doing a good job, I suppose?
I think most exec teams will already have in place some kind of strategic trick. It might be sort of, in terms of profits or people. Some organisations might use sort of KPIs, OKRs, OGSPs, balanced scorecards. I've worked with so many different sort of strategic measures and objectives over the years. At one organisation, we used WIPs, wildly important priorities, so that was quite fun. So there's so many different ways to measure it. But what I would say is you absolutely need those measures kind of nailed down. Where are you now and what are you trying to do? What's the kind of improvement you're trying to make? My preference is very much that the whole leadership team takes responsibility for all of the measures, including the people ones. Quite often it's kind of pushed over to HR, and no, we're part of that team. We fulfill responsibility for making sure finance and commercial or sales have our support on implementing theirs, just the way we would expect them to kind of really make sure that our initiatives that we're putting out there are being implemented properly as well. So we can put all the activities in place, we can offer fantastic development, we can implement the policies, drive engagements through all the different initiatives that we put in place. But if you do have someone who's a really bad line manager, none of that is going to help those who are reporting to that manager to feel engaged or want to stay. So setting standards across the business is really important as well, that you can hold those managers, to account. I would say that there is a responsibility to make sure they've been trained properly. I work with a lot of organisations around training their managers, giving them really good sort of, managerial skills just as a basic, because we also know that a lot of managers just get promoted without any support. So again, having that more compassionate view around have they been trained properly would always be my first question. I do think departments should take responsibility for their engagement and their retention scores, if that's the focus that, from the business. HR should be there to help support, make sure they put, as we said, the initiatives in place, but it's not HR's responsibility to manage your people. That has to be done by the department. We can just make sure you've got the right tools and support you when you need support. But there could be other failings. It might not be a bad line manager. It could be maybe a problem, a failure at the recruitment stage or onboarding stage, or maybe there's an individual team member that's not being particularly nice, or maybe the whole team is not gelling. There's so many different reasons why those things could occur. So obviously understanding what's going on. But in essence, the C-suite should really have a set of metrics that are really focused on delivering the business strategy whilst ensuring that they've got that engaged and motivated workforce. So whatever measures they choose to use, there should be something that everybody in the business can see they're working towards, and they know the progress that's being made as part of that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hey, look, thank you so much. It's really, really useful, really interesting for me, frankly. And I'm sure our audience out there, I know a lot of sort of HR directors, CPOs, also just general HR leaders. One, listen to the podcast, which is great. Thank you. But secondly, this is a big area for them. There's been a lot of organizational transformation, and now it's how do we make our business better? How do we work together more collaboratively? How do we drive the organization forward? And this topic I think in some organisations, they'll be fortunate enough to be able to bring someone in to do this, as you have done. In other cases, they will be doing it themselves, and they've got
Yeah,
to, get in with their peers and their colleagues and their superiors, really, and
yeah.
work out how they perform more effectively as a leadership team. So I'm sure this will definitely be of use. I'm assuming you're okay. People can find you on LinkedIn if they want to reach out
Yes, yeah,
for
absolutely.
insights and
Yeah,
contact.
yeah, please do. I'm on LinkedIn, Terri Bailey. So yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Hey, thank you so much for your time again. It's always great
Very
to catch up.
welcome.
Always interesting to hear from
Thanks.
you. And I'll see you again soon. Thanks a lot,
See you
Terri
again.
Bailey.
Thanks, Simon.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.